Welcome to this absolutely beautiful game called Neva. The sequel, but not really, just the second game from the studio that made Gris, a game that we checked out a couple weeks ago. This game actually just came out in 2024, so it is still pretty fresh, and I am excited to check it out for sure. The game begins with a bird dropping out of the sky and then getting corrupted or something like that by these black flowers that immediately sprout out of its body. We see a small dog-like creature approach the bird and our main character as well. We pick up the bird, which honestly seems kind of ill-advised, when another much larger dog also appears and we start to see other birds drop out of the sky as well. We don't have very long to mourn the bird though, as we see a giant cloud of darkness come sweeping in, and we draw our sword to try to fight it back, but unfortunately it seems to sweep us away. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like our dog friend is doing much better either, as the scene begins to fade to black. Our protagonist wakes up finding that the much larger dog has been slain, unfortunately, but the little puppy actually did manage to survive, so I guess that is a little bit of a bright spot in a bad situation. That takes us right to the beginning of summer and our very first gameplay section, where we see our protagonist is sitting with the little puppy that we now know is called Neva. Weird how things like that work out. That happens to be the name of the game, too. This game is a lot like Gris in many ways. Primarily, it is a 2D exploration game, but this time we're exploring around with a little companion for pretty much the entire thing instead of the little sections that we had in Gris. We also get to see some pretty cool animals, like this big deer, I guess? Caribou? I'm not sure. There's actually quite a few friendly animals at the start of this game. We see a nice big marshy area filled with a bunch of heron, and we also see some weird red butterflies that Neva decides to chase around. Seems a little bit familiar, actually. We even get to run through another absolutely beautiful scene and a field filled with some warthogs. Surely these guys won't turn on me at some point, right? It's actually in that very same field where we see the return of the ooze. A tree seems to have become corrupted with all of those black flowers that we saw infest the bird before. Neva got a little stuck in it, so we had to do a little rescue mission which caused the tree to float up into the air. Probably not a concern. We continue into the forest in front of us, and we get a little glimpse into the main difference between this game and Gris. Gris had no combat whatsoever. I mean, it basically didn't even have a fail state really, but this game decided to do things quite differently and introduced a whole combat mechanism. Now, it's pretty straightforward. You basically just have your standard swing attack, and you'll be fighting through waves of monsters and trying to dodge them, but it's definitely a big departure from what we were doing in the last game, so it's hard to know what to expect exactly. The shadowy arms also seem to have a pretty weird obsession with trying to steal our dog, so we're gonna have to spend some time fighting those back and then calming little Neva's nerves. This eventually culminates in not just the shadow arms trying to grab the dog, but instead we actually have a bunch of little minions that we need to fight back as well. It's interesting that these don't appear to be animal-like in any way. They appear more humanoid, which is a little disturbing considering we haven't seen any other humans around. We do earn the achievement Germination for finishing up Summer Part 1 though. We take a quick power nap and find that the world around us is definitely a lot more blue than I remember it. And in the nighttime, it seems like there's a lot more enemies out than there were friends before. The monsters that we actually have to fight are also getting more complex already as well. This time they even start to throw stuff at us as well. I mean, this is crazy improvement for them. Neva runs off, but we once again find her cowering nearby, and so we go find her and we're back on our way. Even with the new throwing technology, the monsters we're fighting aren't that bad until this much larger monster appears to jump at us from the sky. Downside of being much larger though is that this guy is also much slower, so we just have to run away from him and try to keep a little bit ahead and up in the air. We luckily managed to run the monster into a little bit of a cave that he is definitely too big to fit down into, but on our way into the cave, our rush leads us directly into a pit that we fall into. This leaves us completely separated from Neva, who managed to run across the pit before it broke. Our time apart does give us some reflection time though, as we find our first of the collectibles in this game, these shiny flowers that are hidden throughout the world. Maybe if we were walking around with Neva, we wouldn't have noticed it. I get a little bit more concerned for Neva's safety though when we get this Scooby-Doo-esque chase scene where we're running on the bottom and Neva is running on the top. Our sections of the cave do eventually reconnect, but we find that Neva is completely blocked from us by some of these black vines, so we're gonna need to find a way to scare those out and get Neva back. Luckily for us, we managed to find these weird spirit heads that are hanging out in a nearby area, and once we destroy those, the vines retract. So we managed to rescue our dog from the evil vines, and we're back on our way. Probably the last time we'll get separated though, so I'm not too worried about it. It might be a little early in the video to make this judgment, but, you know, I've played the whole game already, so I think it's fair to say. Some of the combat in this game does definitely get a little bit samey. You do spend a lot of time fighting just these little guys, but there are occasionally some bosses that are pretty cool, like this one right here. We continue moving forward until we find a single square with one hole in it, and this seems a little bit familiar to how they used to do the puzzle solving sections in Gris. The difference being, of course, that this game really doesn't have very many puzzles at all, and instead, for the most part, we're going to be fighting enemies to unlock the little white orbs that will then unlock that next big area. We take the balls of light back to the big square and then stab our sword directly into the ground, which causes the floor to rise up beneath us, creating a staircase and a pretty sick jungle gym. We get another pretty cool shot running through a nice big blue field before we encounter another one of these giant monsters. Though this time we've grown a little bit stronger and we're prepared to take it on instead of just running away from it. We dodge out of the way of the big guy's attacks and stab him over and over again before we get a pretty sick combo finisher along with Neva, which takes out the guy's face, turning him into a big bundle of leaves. His leaves also pollinate the nearby area, growing some flowers out of the blue that we had before, and we earn the achievement Sprouting for finishing Summer Part 2. That leads us to Fall Part 1, where we have a much redder color palette and a noticeably larger Neva. The vibes in Fall are not much better though, as we walk into a forest absolutely filled with these shadow guys and find that Neva is taking out a little bit of aggression on one as well. We walk through another very red field this time, again kind of expecting that we were going to be jumped just like every other time, but actually this time, no fight. We just find that the world has begun to be split open. Nothing crazy. Though our traversal gets a little bit easier once we gain the ability to climb up certain walls. A cool benefit of more grown-up Neva is actually that Neva can help out with combat now as well, also gaining this cool ability to appear and disappear all around the map. I gotta say, it is pretty cool to get to fight side by side with Neva now. But unfortunately, Neva's help isn't quite useful when we fight another one of these giant shadow monsters that's formed by combining a bunch of the little guys. Neva kinda just gets tossed to the side, and we have to do this fight by ourselves. Once we turn the beast into leaves though, we can go back to Neva and wake her up and she's ready to party once again. That leads us into another kind of shattered ruins area that reminds me a lot of the area in Gris actually. This is another one of the areas where you need 2 orbs of light to actually progress, so we need to go left or right, starting with the left. The left path leads us into another very red area that centers around breaking open the ground and ending up in more floating island territory. It eventually ends in a combat against not 1 but 2 of the giant shadow monstrosities, which seems like it'll be a challenge, but honestly not really since we have Neva holding one of them down at most points of the fight. The right side of the map sees us in a light blue palette, and we're fighting against a new mob, these flying bird enemies over here. They start us with just 1, but we very quickly get the call up to need to fight 2 at once, and this is definitely the hardest fight that there's been in the game, for me at least, up to this point. Once we get that fight down though, Neva hits another beautiful howl, which opens up that flower and gives us another one of the glowing white orbs. With orb in hand, we return to the glowing square and stab the ground once again to give ourselves another boost up into the sky. This leads us up to a large tree that has one side of it completely covered by white flowers, which we use to make our way up into the sky. That is, until we see a shadowy figure, quite resembling a witch or something like that, appear beneath us and strike the tree that we've been climbing up. This causes the tree to shatter in two and forces us to parkour between the two different sides of the tree as the darkness climbs up behind us. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of the game. Racing this darkness up to the top of the tree was actually pretty fun. We make it a pretty decent ways up the tree until eventually we are standing on the wrong part of it at the wrong time as it completely shatters and we cut to black as we earn the achievement Establishment for completing Fall Part 1. We awake on the ground in a very foggy pale blue with Neva pawing at us trying to get us up and moving once again. At one point, Neva gets a little bit upset, so we run back and give her a little bit of a cuddle to earn the achievement Loving. We continue pressing on through the fog when we find that unfortunately one of those warthogs that were so friendly at the start of the game seem to have turned on us and started running wild. Fortunately though, these guys aren't very difficult, you just have to dodge a couple times and then they become killable. The game shifts to a more purple-pinky tone as we continue onward and enter the lair of all of the birds that I guess we saw before in that little swampy area. We keep walking through Birdland, eventually making our way out onto the branch of another large tree that, surprise surprise, snaps and drops us right into the arms of some waiting enemies. Maybe we should stop climbing trees, I don't know. None of those guys are really that big of a deal though, so we continue to advance forward until we get grabbed by some shadow hands from the ground. Seems like if they have the ability to do that to us, I'm not really sure why they don't just do it all the time, but things turn from bad to worse as a warthog begins to charge us, but luckily Neva is strong enough now that she can charge directly into that beast's face and take it out. This combat unlocks a cool new ability for us to be able to launch Neva out of our sword and directly at enemies, which will stun them, giving us a chance to move in and slay them with our sword. Having that ability also leads to probably my favorite boss fight in the game, maybe? It's not super complicated, but basically there's this giant woolly mammoth looking creature with all of these heads sprouting out of the top of it. It's too big for us to fight, so we need to run away, but also turn around and launch Neva up to take out the heads that are controlling it before we get to the edge of the cliff. We finish that area up and once again drop out of the sky into another area below it. Gotta say, if I've got one criticism of this game, feels like they really overused the dropping out of the sky thing. But down below we find Neva hanging out looking at these two deer, but of course they're not regular deer, they've actually been corrupted as well, so now it's combat time. It started out as a fight against one, but eventually they both come to life and we need to try to dodge, duck, dip, dive, dodge, and kill both of them at the same time. This is a little challenging, I guess, but really it's not too bad with Neva's help. Once we move to take out the second deer, it has a bunch of the corrupted heads erupt from its mouth, and we once again do a tag team takedown with Neva to take out these deer and turn them into grass. And we earn the achievement Growth for finishing up Fall Part 2. We start Fall Part 3 in a much darker area with Neva nowhere in sight. We explore around for a little bit until eventually we get led to drop down from the sky once again into a little bit of a lighter area. We reconvene with Neva where she is looking at another big wolf that is upside down in this kind of weird shadow area. This area is also a little cool because we have to start thinking with portals. Again, none of the puzzles are very hard, but I wasn't expecting this, so it was kind of fun. After descending down another tower, we drop out of the bottom of it directly down onto another bridge where we once again see that shadowy wolf reflected in the moonlight. Reflected definitely isn't the right word. Silhouetted maybe? Yeah, that's probably it. Once we fight through the waves of enemies, Doggy Darko disappears and we once again find ourselves bathed in a very bright red light. Nothing ominous about that at all. We descend through the red area, once again taking a very big drop. I'm gonna have to stop mentioning it. It's just making me mad now that I've started calling it out so specifically. But we end up in a very, very dark area where we basically can't see anything around us. But luckily, Neva actually grows, so now in order to start moving around, we need to call Neva to light up the area around us. This is a pretty cool way to explore this area. I've gotta say they were kinda cooking with this one. I also had the keen eye and noticed in this area that there were a lot of these little statues hidden around the place. Now, I got screwed by the rock statues in Gris, so I wasn't going to let that happen to me again. I was on high alert and I broke all of them to earn the achievement Comfort, the second rarest achievement in the game actually. I guess breaking all of those statues awoke this ancient wolf that was previously hiding in the moon, and he is not super happy with us, deciding to challenge us to a pretty big fight. At this point, this is, again, the hardest fight that we've had in this game up to this point, I would say. This fight is pretty similar to the ones that we've had previously, maybe a little bit slower, need to spend a little bit more time dodging out of the way before we learn the patterns and can take him down. But once we do, we see that he again erupts full of all of these monsters' heads, and a combo attack with Neva takes him out and earns us the Dormancy achievement for finishing Fall Part 3. Winter Part 1 sees us appear with the biggest Neva by far, and interestingly enough, we're actually riding her. This will be pretty common throughout this chapter, as this is the new skill that we've learned. She's big enough for it now, I guess. We continue moving forward with Neva in tow, eventually arriving on a bridge where we see that shadowy witch once again appear in front of us, shattering the ground beneath our feet, and dropping us directly down below into a new area. Do you see what I'm talking about now? Is it just me? It feels like it's constant, honestly. This new area is another place where there's a left puzzle and a right puzzle. Once again, and pretty much as always in this game, we decide to go with the left puzzle first, just in case we miss any collectibles or anything that would not be accessible after this point. The left area is fairly cool. It's primarily centered around these square bricks that you break and then reappear. But then also sometimes the bricks fall from the ceiling because one of those shadow guys is controlling them and you end up in another combat scenario, which is also pretty fun to be fair. Taking out those boxy boys gives us our first white orb that we need in this area. On our way back from the left, we find an old gray wolf that is absolutely going crazy mode on one of these shadowy enemies. It has a little bit of a moment with Neva, but seems to get scared away and runs in the opposite direction. But the wolf is luckily staying not too far away as we get captured in some shadow arms once again, and Neva gets knocked down by an overwhelming wave of enemies. The Grey Wolf hops into action, taking everybody out and saving our day. The wolf runs away and we continue on to the right side of the map, which sees us walk over this absolutely gorgeous ice area with the reflection of the mountains in the distance. Man, that was a cool shot. But that reflection was kind of just a warning of what was about to come, as we see that the next area's combat is centered around not actually seeing the enemies, but instead seeing their reflection in the floor. We break through the floor at the end of the area that drops us straight down below into a new place where our movement has been reversed and we need to tell what's going on based on our mirror image we see on the other side. Movement gets a little bit rough here since the controls are switched though. Once we do a little bit of combat, the next step is to do some kind of tricky mirror world parkour. Now, most levels in this game actually have a hidden collectible in them, and this one is no different, this time being the hidden birds in Winter Part 1. What is a little bit different though is I absolutely 100% on accident got this achievement because I missed my jump and happened to land where the fourth bird was hidden. I'm not going to complain about that though, that is pretty cool. This area ends with another pretty cool mirror parkour world, but this time we're actually climbing up instead of left to right. Gotta say, didn't know what to expect at the start of this area, but I really ended up enjoying it. We ride back towards the center of the level where we can move on, but find that our gray wolf friend has been attacked by a bunch of the shadow creatures, so it's time for us to fight back. We manage to free the gray wolf, which causes Neva and the wolf to make up a little bit, I guess. They rub their antlers together, and then we can go ahead and unlock the next area, digging our sword into the ground and opening up the jungle gym. As a thank you for saving his life, even though I guess it really just made it even because he saved us previously, the wolf decides to guide us up through the ruins, which is pretty helpful, I guess. The game continues to improve with the cool movement abilities, this time adding an enemy that gives you a mega jump when you hit it with a downward slash, which is also pretty cool. With Grey Wolf's help, we make our way all the way back up the ruins and onto that bridge where we encountered the witch before. We try to take a swing at her, but that's not really gonna work quite yet, as she chooses to transform herself into an absolutely giant monster that's gonna inevitably chase us down. We do some more pretty cool parkour, pretty similar to the first boss fight that was like this that we did actually, way back in the first level, but this time she is very slowly gaining on us, about to swallow us up until the Grey Wolf once again comes out of nowhere, stunning her and allowing us to take advantage. The Grey Wolf and Neva hold her down while we climb up to the top and stab through her head, forcing her to unleash all of that pollen out into the air, and we have finished up another area. The pollen comes down from the sky and lands around us, causing some trees to spring up in the immediate nearby area. We give Neva a hug, which seems kind of sweet, but then I realize what's happening as the camera pans out to the Grey Wolf. Neva appears beside the Grey Wolf, and they begin to walk off together as we earn the achievement Flowering. I actually kind of thought that this was about to be the end of the game when I was playing, but we are not quite done yet. Winter Part 2 sees us start as a little speck in a very white world surrounding us, and Neva is definitely gone. Although I am going to try to press the Y button to call out for her a couple times, which earns me the Longing achievement. It's sad, but we continue moving forward as the game is pressuring us to do, and we run into some more of the shadow enemies. Gotta say, these enemies aren't very tough, but I feel like I kind of became a Neva one-trick. This fight seems to be dragging on forever now that I can't summon her at will. This area is pretty cool though. We get to ride in an elevator, which I guess now's a better time than ever because Neva was famously afraid of those. We also get to take on a fight against one of the slightly bigger enemies, and again, without Neva, the presence is surely missed. This area eventually leads to us climbing up a very viney looking pillar as we see some of the shadowy enemies being flung off the side. It's a little bit ominous, and I was kind of hoping that I would find Neva and the Grey Wolf up here, but I'm not so lucky. What we instead find at the top is once again the shadowy witch, who is ready for a big sword fight. Just to give a little bit of an update, this is definitely the hardest combat in this game, and I could definitely see people that really enjoyed Gris being put off from this game because this fight is a big jump up in difficulty. It's not that bad, it only took me a couple of attempts to bring her down, and when I did it, it felt pretty good, but if you were somebody that was into Gris for the story adventure elements of it, this might put you off a little bit. Anyway, we thought we had the upper hand on her, but she manages to flip it around on us and is just about to take us out when a much bigger Neva appears in front of us and knocks her away and prepares us for the second phase of this boss fight. We once again thought that we had the best of the witch after phase 2, and we're going to take her out when she suddenly grabs Neva out of the air. This being of pure evil digs into Neva's face, opening up a cut around her eye and causing her to begin flowering all around the wound. Unfortunately for her though, Neva is also kind of an expert in turning things into flowers and unleashes a giant howl which forces the witch to be covered in flowers as well. This seems to take the witch out, but Neva appears to be fine as she approaches our protagonist, once again waking her back up. Neva proceeds to load our main character up on their back and is carrying us back towards the forest as we earn the achievement Pollination for finishing up Winter Part 2. We get another absolutely beautiful look down from the top of this mountain we were on, down into the forest that is now suddenly brimming with life once again. They really got me this time. I thought this was going to be the end for sure, and it's definitely not yet. Our protagonist once again wakes up in the forest that we saw at the beginning of the game, once again with Neva, but this time with a very small little version of Neva as well. We've got another puppy, folks, it's great. So now we do another slow walk through the forest with much larger Neva and the little puppy who is behaving quite a bit like Neva did at the beginning of the game, jumping all around the place. This ending area seems a little bit pointless other than getting to meet the puppy and doing a walk through some beautiful scenery, but we do manage to find a tree that looks quite a bit like the trees that were in Gris, so we go ahead and stand under it and sing to earn the achievement Memories. 12 achievements down. We walk out into a nice big open field with our dog family, and I'm wondering how this game is gonna end. Until we get a shot up in the sky as we see a bird fall down and once it hits the ground begin to flower into a black flower. If this cutscene seems pretty familiar to you, then you were definitely paying very good attention at the start of the video, as this was the initial scenario that we saw happen before we even really began playing the game. We see the darkness come crashing in from the distance, and our main character and Neva try to fight it off, but they're just not strong enough. We see that Neva goes down, but our protagonist and the baby manage to survive. This was pretty interesting. By the time I got to this point, I had kind of forgotten where we started the story at, so it was a pretty interesting experience getting to the end here. We earned the achievement Seed for finishing up the game, and now it's time for us to go back via Chapter Select and wrap up the remaining achievements that we missed the first time around. The first thing that I decided to do is return to the first level of the game and go for the achievement Provide. There were 5 different areas where you could feed Neva in the level. I actually ended up missing 2 of them, so I return and get those wrapped up. The next achievement is called Empathy. We return to Fall Part 2, and every time we kill one of the big monsters, we need to walk over to Neva and sing to the creature to honor it. Again, we got most of these, but I missed out on a couple of birds actually, so in the end we managed to get that locked down. The next achievement, Mentoring, is for returning to Fall Part 1 and going over and petting Neva whenever she reacts to the shadow monsters that are all around you. Pretty easy, but we do need to play a pretty good chunk of the game to get that one wrapped up. The penultimate achievement is called Wily, and we need to return to Summer Part 2 to this first boss fight-ish thing that we had to do. Now this guy will launch his tentacles from the side and hit his allies, and what we need to do is get him to actually kill one of his allies and the achievement will pop. And the final achievement is called Blossoming for collecting every single one of the flower collectibles throughout the game. I actually only missed 3 this time, so it was pretty easy to go back, and now we can say that we've officially done everything in Neva. But how did we do? Neva took me a total of 5.3 hours, so definitely a pretty short game and not too bad to get through. Also, I'm gonna kind of try to breeze through this end of video recap. Sorry if you can hear all of that construction that's going on outside. I'm not happy about it either. This was a decently fun game. Obviously, the best thing about it, I would say, is the visual style, though I did begin to click with this game a little bit more towards the end as we got some more abilities. I will say the first half of the game was a little bit of a struggle for me to get into though, but the art was definitely there the entire way through. As always, please feel free to let me know what you all thought about this video and this game down in the comments section below. I always love checking out all of the comments that I get on all of these videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. See you!